Okay, let's dive in. When you think Florida, maybe beaches come to mind first. Theme parks.
Yeah, probably the usual stuff. Sunshine, cities.
Right. But this stack of sources you sent over, fascinating stuff. Articles, notes, it paints a totally different picture. Florida's wild side.
Absolutely. There's this ancient wild heart to the state. Incredible life.
So that's our focus for this deep dive. We want to pull out the key insights from all this material.
Understand that balance, right, between people and wildlife in Florida.
Exactly. And look at the conservation efforts, the challenges these animals face, all based on what's in these sources you provided.
Sounds good. It's quite a story.
So, living in Florida, the sources make it sound almost like being in a nature documentary sometimes.
That's a really good way to put it, actually. And it makes sense. The material points to that unique subtropical climate, the incredibly diverse ecosystems.
Wetlands, mangroves, pine forests, even coral reefs offshore. Just amazing variety.
And all that variety supports a huge amount of wildlife.
But that closeness, that abundance, well, the sources are clear. Human encounters with wildlife are common and not always peaceful.
No, definitely not always simple. You shared those stories from locals in the notes.
Yeah, like imagine hiking and seeing an alligator. Those prehistoric eyes just watching you.
Right, or finding your neighborhood is suddenly dealing with, say, invasive Burmese pythons in backyards. Literally.
It really brings home those core challenges the sources detail. Habitat loss from development, obviously.
Yep, that's a big one. Plus climate change messing with ecosystems, and then these invasive species just throwing everything off balance.
And you can see the results.
Hmm.
Like the sources mention alligators, which are a keystone species, right? Huge impact.
Exactly. They're wandering into suburbs more often because their own space is shrinking or changing.
And the pythons. They're not just creepy crawlies in the yard.
Yeah.
They're hitting the native wildlife hard, preying on birds, mammals.
Threatening whole food chains. The sources are pretty stark about that.
So the consequences mentioned are, well, pretty serious. Animals pushed out, ecosystems at risk, sometimes even risks to people's safety.
Yeah. And understanding that dance, that coexistence in a landscape that's getting smaller for wildlife, these sources show it's not just Florida's problem.
It's like a snapshot of what's happening elsewhere, too, as human areas expand. A useful lens, maybe, for looking at our own backyards, metaphorically speaking.
Definitely.
Okay, let's zoom in on some of the stars of Florida's wild side, using the details straight from your sources.
Sounds good. Where should we start?
How about the Florida panther? The sources describe it as, well, majestic, but super elusive.
Sure.
A type of cougar, right?
That's right, a subspecies. Mostly in South Florida, the Everglades, big cypress area. That's their main turf, according to the material.
And the critical thing the sources stress is just how endangered they are. One of the most endangered mammals in the U.S.
Yeah, the numbers are tragically low. The estimates cited are somewhere between, 120 and 230 left?
Wow. And the main threats listed are habitat loss, pushing them into smaller and smaller areas.
And getting hit by cars. Vehicle collisions are a major killer, sadly.
But there is work being done. The sources mention conservation efforts, things like wildlife corridors.
To help them cross roads safely. And breeding programs, too, trying to boost the population.
And you included that amazing anecdote from one source, a photographer capturing rare footage. A mother panther and her cubs.
Oh, yeah, just padding through the undergrowth. A heart-stopping glimpse, I think was the phrase used.
Yeah, really drives home what's at stake.
Definitely.
Okay, then there are the manatees, the gentle giants.
Or mermaids, as some old accounts in the sources called them, found in coastal waters, warm springs, mostly just eating seagrass. Very peaceful.
Slow-moving, iconic symbols of Florida. Remember that bit you shared about kayaking near Crystal River?
Ah, yes, seeing one surface for air. That whiskered snout just breaking the surface, it's quite something.
They seem so vulnerable, though.
They are. The sources highlight the big threats. Boats, mainly. Collisions are a huge problem. And their habitat degrading.
So what's being done? The sources mention rescue missions.
Yes, dedicated rescue teams for injured manatees. And a lot of public education, like the work done by groups like the Save the Manatee Club mentioned in the notes. Raising awareness is crucial.
Okay, switching gears.
Huh.
Let's look up. The sources had some great stuff about Florida's birds.
Oh, definitely. You've got the bald eagle, for one, soaring over lakes, a real symbol of resilience, given their own comeback story.
Yeah, amazing comeback. And then something totally different, the roseate spoonbill.
Ah, yes. With those incredible bubblegum pink feathers and that unique spoon-shaped bill, you see them wading in the marshes.
That description of seeing a flock in the Everglades at sunset, wings glowing.
Yeah,
Just beautiful imagery from the source.
it really is. But the skies aren't just native icons, there are invaders there, too.
Right, you mean like the monk parakeet.
Exactly. The sources mention them bright green, super noisy, forming these big chattering flocks, especially in cities like Miami.
Another example of a non-native species just thriving where it wasn't before.
Mm-hmm. It's a common theme in the materials.
And speaking of invaders,
Mm-hmm.
we definitely need to spend some time on the Everglades based on your sources.
Absolutely. A UNESCO World Heritage Site, that famous river of grass. It's unique.
It's this huge wetland across South Florida,
Yeah.
and the wildlife mix there is incredible. The sources point out it's one of the rare places where alligators and crocodiles live side by side.
Yeah, that's pretty unusual. Plus all the wading birds, herons, egrets, ibises, and panthers still roaming the edges.
That anecdote about paddling through mangrove tunnels there, feeling like another world, the air just humming, really captures it.
It does, but the Everglades, as your sources hammer home, is ground zero for invasive species.
The Burmese python comes up again and again in the material, probably the most infamous example.
Introduced through the pet trade, mostly, and the sources say it's just wreaked havoc.
They get huge,
Yeah.
right, over 18 feet sometimes.
Easily. And they eat basically everything. Rodents, birds, deer, even alligators sometimes. They've decimated native animal populations.
The sources mentioned the python challenged the annual hunt.
Yeah. It's described as this stark reminder of the scale of the problem and, well, how human actions, even unintentional ones like releasing pets, can just upend an ecosystem.
And the massive effort needed now to try and fix it.
Exactly. Trying to restore some kind of balance.
But it's not all doom and gloom. Your sources also really highlight the dedication to conservation in Florida. Lots of people working tirelessly.
Yes, there are some really inspiring stories in the material. You mentioned the manatee rescue earlier.
Right, in Tampa Bay, that team working for hours to free one tangled in fishing line, then weeks of rehab.
And finally releasing it back, it's described as a testament to human compassion. Powerful stuff.
But also, sadly, a reminder of those ongoing threats, fishing gear, boat propellers.
And now warming waters impacting their food and habitat too. New challenges emerging.
And thinking back to the panther photos that mother and cubs.
Mm-hmm. That's framed as more than just a lucky shot. It's a rare gift that fuels the conservation drive.
Raises awareness, pushes for protecting their habitats, building those safe corridors we talked about.
Yeah, and the sources mention the FWC, the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, using radio collars, actively restoring habitat. Real on-the-ground work.
And invasive species work goes beyond pythons, too. The sources mention lionfish.
Oh, yeah. Beautiful, but venomous. And they have huge appetites, a big threat to the coral reefs.
So what are the counter efforts there?
Divers, researchers trying to manage them. They even have these lionfish derbies mentioned in the sources, competitions to remove as many as possible.
Interesting approach. So all these stories, the sources seem to be saying, they highlight the stakes involved. Every species matters.
Right. They each play a role in that whole ecosystem's health. It's all connected.
The material definitely confronts the reality of living with all this wildlife. It's not easy, but it's framed as a kind of shared responsibility.
Mm-hmm. And it's getting harder, isn't it? Urban sprawl keeps pushing people and animals closer together.
Yeah, less space for everyone. And then climate change on top of that, rising seas hitting coastal habitats, more extreme weather, messing up migrations.
Mm-hmm.
It adds layers of complexity.
It really does. But the sources also show people adapting, small things locals do.
Like securing trash cans,
Mm.
right? Basic stuff. Avoiding certain trails when alligators are mating. Supporting bans on harmful pesticides. Practical steps.
Exactly. And education is highlighted as key. That FWC Living with Alligators program, for instance, teaching people how to coexist safely, respectfully.
Respect seems important. And community action, too. Beach cleanups, citizen science projects,
Mm-hmm.
people getting involved directly.
Yeah, like that anecdote about joining a sea turtle nesting patrol you shared, marking nests on the beach at night.
Witnessing those ancient sea turtles, it must be humbling. It makes you think about how our actions impact their survival.
Definitely. And the sources try to capture why Florida's wildlife matters in that bigger picture sense. It's not just the animals themselves.
It's described as a living tapestry, right? Defining the state's identity, its character.
Yeah, part of what makes Florida, Florida. It's fragile, beautiful, resilient, all at once.
So protecting these species, it's really about preserving that whole web of life, the one that supports Florida's environment, its economy through tourism, its culture.
Exactly. It's all interconnected.
Okay, so wrapping up our journey through this material, we've touched on some amazing creatures, some really big challenges from development, climate change, invasives.
But also those vital conservation efforts detailed in the sources. The human dedication.
And it seems clear from the reading that keeping Florida's wildlife healthy, protecting places like the Everglades, it takes everyone, collective action.
Yeah, the sources suggest things like supporting groups like the Everglades Foundation, volunteering, making sustainable choices less plastic, advocating for wetlands.
That reminder woven through the material. Every small action counts.
Mm-hmm. It's easy to feel overwhelmed by the scale of, say, the python problem or habitat loss. But then you see the resilience, like the bald eagles or the passion of the manatee rescuers.
It does offer hope.
Yeah.
And maybe a final thought stemming from these sources.
Yeah.
It goes beyond Florida, really.
Yeah.
What small action could you, the listener, take? Inspired by these stories of challenge, but also resilience, what could you do to help the balance of life, in your own corner of the world?